Hi guys, thanks for all being out here today. Part of what we're doing and just trying to, like Adam said, continue to innovate, provide different ways for people to get access to just tidbits of training and information. We can kind of get imbued in what we do in the everyday. And so sometimes innovating really to me is pausing, taking a step back and reflecting. So I work for the city of San Ramon, and part of my job there is as the recreation coordinator to oversee inclusive services and providing accommodations for people with disabilities. My objective today initially was just to focus on person-first language, but as we're all working in our professions, I think it's important to talk about communication overall, because communication is really what makes or breaks relationships, whether they are personal or professional. And so Virginia Satir, who is regarded as the pioneer of family therapy and also co-founder of Mental Research Institute, said this in one of her textbooks, that communication is the largest single factor determining what kinds of relationships we make with others and what happens to us in the world about us. And I believe that is absolutely true. And so today what I really want to talk to you about are barriers in effective communication, doing a personal inventory of those things that get in the way of us having effective communication with people, and then talk about our language choices. How are we referring to others that we are trying to communicate with? So if you look in the internet for barriers to effective communication, as I did, you're going to find a ton of information, and they're all kind of coming from different points, but I really liked this image from investorsbook.com. They do a lot of organizational psychology, and they've kind of highlighted these main areas and broken it up into, there are obviously barriers involving the words that we use, so if you're using a lot of jargon, right, that's particular to your agency, you're already creating a barrier there. People aren't going to understand what you're saying. So we want to break it down and really make sure we're using clear communication and making sure that our patron or whoever we're talking to is really understanding where we're coming from. There are barriers involving our personal backgrounds, just attitudinal differences that we have, experience of our upbringings, which can cause us to jump to conclusions. And then there is physical distance, ambient noise, and other physiological barriers that would constitute physical barriers. So we'll talk a little bit about that as well. But what I really want to focus on are the barriers involving our backgrounds. This is where biases are formed. And I want to say, inherently, these things that we come up with are not themselves good or bad, but it's what we do with that information, with those opinions that we have formulated in our minds, that then those actions could be construed as good or bad. So to use a psychology or sociology term, we develop schemas in our life. So these are ways that we categorize information so that we know as we move from one event to the next how to interact with people, right? So we do this as a way for our brain to kind of synthesize information so that way not every time you're walking into a business meeting you're having to think, how do I conduct myself? Who do I talk to? What type of language do I use? And so I really liked this image as well from Very Well. So we create these schemas like social schemas for how you interact maybe on a date. She's thinking he's going to pay for the movie tickets and he's thinking don't eat garlic. We have event schemas or like work schemas that we come up with, right? So we want to be professional, shake hands in our culture, and worry about, how we're dressing professionally. Then we also have person schemas, how we kind of categorize people. And again, it's not inherently bad, but what you do with those opinions that you form can be bad. And then we have self schemas too. How do I think of myself? Truths that I know about myself. Behaviors that I know I kind of do and are inherent to who I am as a person. So all of these things are just how we walk through life. Again, so that your brain isn't having to take all this information on as new every single time. It allows you to focus on those other details. And so right now I just want to take a little bit of time to do some free association, do a little inventory of our own biases, okay? So just to yourself, think about either the first word or image that comes to mind with the following. Leaders. Education. Money. Family. free time, well-being, work, disabilities. So we all had something that kind of came to mind at first for us. And again, none of those things are inherently good or inherently bad, but it's what you do with that information, how you interact with people. An example of a bias would be for my self-schema is that I like to approach situations rationally and logically. Now, the application of that is I don't understand why someone would buy something just based on emotional appeal. For me, it needs to be functional and make sense to fit into my life. I'm not going to buy something that I don't really need. Now, that being said, again, that's not negative. But if I then tell someone who buys something based on emotional desires that they're stupid for that, that is the thing that's bad, right? Or I might have a bias towards Prius drivers. If I think that everyone who drives a Prius is a bad driver, I mean, that's okay to keep in here, right? That's fine. But if the life application for that is then every time I see a Prius driver, I'm trying to drive them off the road or cut in front of them, right? That's the bad thing. And so that's why I really want to take time today, just like think about, where am I coming from? What is my prejudice against this, or what is my just inclination towards these different things? Because that really forms how we talk to people. And when we communicate, we're not only painting the picture of the world for ourselves, but we're really painting how others view us with the language that we use. So I know we get caught up in stuff, but we really want to be mindful about the language that we use. Frustration, I really believe in communication, comes from when we forget that communication is really a multi-party event. It's always at least two people. And so a lot of times we're communicating just for us to get our point across, but we really want to take inventory of the other person as well. If we know anything about them, where they're coming from. If they have a disability, maybe this is a physical barrier, maybe they have a hearing impairment, or maybe there's a cognitive delay or a language processing delay. All of these things are things that you don't necessarily see and are aware of on the outset, but that's again why we want to take time, pause, think about our own context and the context of this other person. Great. There we go. I love this quote from Mark Twain. He said, "The difference between the almost right word and the right word is really a large matter. 'Tis the difference between the lightning bug and the lightning." Right, so that's a pretty big difference. And sometimes it's just a slip of the tongue. We say the wrong thing. If it's email communication, we might leave a word out. But it really is that little bit here or there that can really change what you're communicating. So in getting to talking about, working with people with various disabilities, we want to talk about using person-first language. Now, this has been the industry standard now for a while, but I know that it is still can be difficult for people to get on board with. But really, person-first language is when working with people with various disabilities or conditions, this language is putting personhood first before the disability. And really, the goal of this is to emphasize people's abilities, not their disabilities, to avoid labels and negative stereotypes, and really to lend language of respect and self-determination in a society that can habitually discriminate against them and perpetuate negative stereotypes. So what does all this look like functionally? We have some negative phrases on the left and positive phrases or affirmative phrases on the right. I'm not going to necessarily go through all of these, but just broadly, person-first language, you would not say the disabled. You wouldn't say the handicapped person. You'd say a person with a disability or person who has a handicap. Confined or restricted to a wheelchair would be a negative phrase. It's connotating that they're suffering and they're restricted. But you could say a person who is using a wheelchair. Someone who, and I automatically now just say someone who is. We wouldn't say the deaf necessarily. You'd say someone who has hearing loss or hearing impairment. Really what I want to get to here is some of these really negative terms that we use a lot, like, oh, that person's crazy, and we'll say it very flippantly. I'm not going to lie, I definitely say that chick right. That happens sometimes, but we really do want to be sensitive and think about the social context that we're in when we're saying that, because people really do suffer from mental health disorders, and so I get it, we don't want to take it too far and be too extreme, but at the same time we want to be aware of these things. And really chiefly, number one for me is I really hope by now that we have eradicated from our language the colloquial use of the word retarded, right? That really has been used so negatively to connotate someone who has an actual disability, but we use it so flippantly to refer to other people when we really mean like we think they're stupid, or we don't like what they represent, or we just think they're dumb in general. But really clinically, to actually have mental retardation as it clinically stands, you actually have to have an IQ of 75 or lower. And actually, typically the people that are referred to in that way have standard IQs. Even if you are talking about often, unfortunately, people with Down syndrome a lot will be called retarded based on their features. But really, most of them have average IQs. I've seen some really awesome motivational speakers and actors and actresses and highly successful and trained athletes, right? So we just really want to be mindful of the language that we're using. And then at the bottom, you may have seen that a negative phrase to use would be to refer to everyone else as normal. We want to say someone without a disability, or really just ultimately like refer to people by their names, right? Get to know the people that you're working with. And the only reason, again, that normal is brought up is not so much to never use it, but to be aware of the context in which we're using it, right? So if we're presenting or we're trying to onboard staff, and some people have disabilities and some people don't, or if we're doing a program for participants and we're saying, well, all the normal people can, we're gonna do it this way, and if you have a disability, we're gonna do it this way. Really just wanna today's, for me, is really about just bringing mindfulness into how we're communicating with people. Now, on another side of this, there are people who prefer identity-first language. And these are people in the world of health and psychology, but also people themselves with various disabilities who prefer identity-first language. And so proponents of identity-first language really defer to the individual, to ask, how would you like to be referred to? Because the argument is that person-first language separates something that is really essential to the identity of the individual. For someone who was born with a disability and has had that their whole life, it's not negative to them. It's how they function in their normal life, and they don't feel, they don't feel negative about it inherently, but when we're trying to always separate their disability from them and say, oh, you're not your disability, they're like, well, no, really, this is functionally like who I am, and I'm okay with that. And so, the goal in this as well, you'll see the same, is to avoid labels, negative stereotypes, emphasize abilities, and to lend language to people of respect and self-determination, in a society that habitually kind of discriminates against them. So really, person-first language or identity-first language, the end goal is the same, and ultimately should be to refer to the individual, defer to them on how they would like to be known and understood. But today, for me, it was really about just getting some context on ourselves, our backgrounds, our biases that we may have, and then making sure that we are taking inventory of that other person as well. That communication is really about both parties, or all parties. And to end, with this quote from the Beatles, in the end, the love that you take is equal to the love that you make, right? So we get what we give. And so really just wanted to take time to inventory our personal biases, take time to do that in your daily life. Realize that communication is not just for you. And ultimately, we want to get to know the individuals that we are working with, communicating with, and put the person first. Refer to them how they want to be referred to just enhance our overall communication. And as we walk in towards life, just interacting with people in a way that is respectful to all people. Thank you.
All right. Get out in front of the speaker. Thank you, Jessica. That was fantastic. Appreciate that. Do we have questions? This is the time, the audience participation time. All right. We got a couple questions. Mr. Jackson.
Jessica, I was just wondering, how or have you been able to kind of roll this out or train your staff in some of this language?
Yes, thank you for asking. Actually, so when Adam asked me, if I would present on a topic, and being on a CPRS board, District 3 board as well, and getting to talk to people in other agencies, they really have said, no, this is important stuff to talk about. And so we have, for a long time, before I got there, San Ramon has really worked on training their staff on using appropriate language. So yeah, that the slide with the negative and affirmative phrases, that is something that we have had for a while, and we do at all of our annual part-time summer staff trainings. So every year, we go through the information again and really make sure, especially over summer, we're providing a lot of accommodations for kids with various disabilities to integrate into all of our camps, and we feel that it is really important to train all of our staff, even if they're not going to end up working with an individual with a disability, for all of us to be using the same language so that it becomes a culture and not just, a one-on-one event. So, yeah.
Other questions?
How do you really feel about Prius drivers?
That's a great question. I didn't put it in the slide because I thought about it, and then I was like, that's funny. But then I was like, there might be a Prius driver. And I don't actually think you're a bad person. I think you're probably fine. You care about the environment.
How would you go correcting other children that are calling other children these sort of negative names based on like they're crazy or they're weird or and they actually have like severe ADHD or something like that how do you go, you can't really get into that, but what would you do?
So that's a great question. So especially if you're, it's one thing to talk to adults and train them, but yeah, if you're working with other kids and seeing that, it's just a great opportunity to say, you know what, and I'm sure, especially nowadays, lots of places have language around anti-bullying and codes of conduct and all of that. But it's really a great talking point and teaching point to say, you know what, that's not really nice words, because, he's just different. And how are ways that you're different? See, you like this and he likes this, or she likes this. These are ways that we're different. And then bring it around to but what are ways that we're the same, right? So we're all a little bit different, but at the end of the day, we're all the same, and we want to use nice words with each other, whether or not, we have the exact same opinion, something of that nature. So yeah, I wouldn't shy away from it, and just use it as a teaching point to use kind words. So, yeah.
Any other questions? All right, we'll let Jessica off the hook right now. So thank you, Jessica. Appreciate that.